By the 1950s, digital computers that were general purpose and could store programs were entering the market, and Nippon Electric Company was joining in on making electronic computers more of a thing in general. Through the 1960s, computers kept getting smaller until you got to the microcomputers of the 70s. NEC took full advantage of this growing niche, forming a microcomputer sales department and even releasing an introductory book for people that sold hundreds of thousands of copies. Of course, what got so many into desktops in the 1970s was the pre-built market. The casual person didn't have to build their own computer setup. You could just buy a box and plug it into a screen. Suddenly, companies like Sharp offered a pre-build alongside their build kits, and Nippon Electric are focusing on a carefully planned pre-build with all the bells and whistles to end the 70s strong. And that would dominate the desktop market. The 1979 NEC PC 8001 is home to one of the most interesting horror FPSs to me. Nobuitsu Fujinami's The Alien Island 3D version, though I'm not aware of any other version, as you arrive on forested islands infested with monsters. Your goal is to stop them from deforesting the islands and explore for treasure. Though the thing that stands out to me is your shots have a longer range than an entire island. Meaning if you shoot and miss, it keeps going until it either hits something or flies off the coast of the landmass you're on. You could even accidentally hit your own boat and strand yourself. Apart from that, not wanting to lose points by Swiss cheesing the trees you're trying to save as you exterminate and not destroying the treasures of these islands promotes a satisfying care to your approach. By this point you even had open FPSs on VCS with beautiful visual environments, but this raises the bar on a mechanical level. You can drag bodies, but be careful, as like insects with egg sacs. The babies can hatch from a downed body. They can't swim though, so maybe take advantage of nearby water when moving a body with an unhatched egg sac. For years I assumed this random, but only recently read someone breaking down that there are male and female aliens, and when on top of each other the egg sac forms with hatched babies only growing to adults after eating enough trees. Creating a living ecosystem of this invasive species wreaking havoc. I'm almost more surprised people are doing zoology of this environment when it's so hectic. If a treasure you seek is destroyed, you get a message telling you to end your player, and you can technically hit yourself with your own shots to do so. Eventually you'll begin to run into enemies who are also armed, and then you'll be engaging in firefights including worrying about ricocheting shots. This game is such a bar raiser to me. Succeeding the PC 8001 was the PC 8801, alongside the cheaper 6001. The following year would even see the more premium 9801, making the 8800 series the middle ground, and quite the impactful one. It's where Snatcher is from, it's where Yeast is from, it's where the Screamer is from. Magical Zoo's The Screamer is a game I always see brought up when there's any discussion of horror games of this era, accomplishing such a good job of making you feel like a part of B-City, riding in, finding your way around the civilization once run by the artificial system Bias, before it became corrupted. You don't want to be ill-prepared when entering the dangerous infested facility that housed the system, or when you run into the world's colorful cast. After all, as the game tells you in the beginning, the only way to survive is to dehumanize. And surviving might be more on your mind when the game deletes your save upon death. The game's art direction is such a treat that complements running into interesting design after interesting design with thought-provoking story to think about. From the nationalist who wants to rebuild the government to the former company president who lurks the abandoned Bias building. Seeing how World War III affects a civilization so built up compared to those affected by the second one creates an interesting tale of a more privileged society facing the aftermath of such a conflict, which creates victims with grander ambitions to self-indulgently react to what it took from them, while they knowingly or not, are still creating the precedents for the next generation who are growing up with them as the grown-ups around. Which I definitely felt when running into a 12-year-old in a dungeon and readying myself for combat before finding out what path in life he had chosen. While there's been a couple of adaptations of the Screamer to other media, the way you explore in a first person with the tension of running into something in these over-the-shoulder reveals does so much for the spectacle of these designs and the stories of what you're seeing. The packaging of this game is also very satisfying. It's a book that begins with a prequel graphic novel that becomes a regular novel, and then becomes the game's instruction manual, which is the type that continues the world build. Then finally there's blank pages to serve as a journal for your adventures, and hollowed out pages hiding the game discs. Now this is style, and creates cohesion and art direction with the game mimicking that black and white hand-drawn panel look. The use of visuals in horror games really leaped in the 80s, and the advancement of hardware shouldn't get all the credit, but the bar raising for visual direction. In 1983, students at the University of Kinky would create Horror House, sold through Neon Falcom as the first in a series of occult mystery adventures, piquing the interest of many with its visual style. Predominantly this shot of one of the monsters haunting the F family's new house that you've been sent in to investigate. You'll be looking around the puzzling manner with the tension of running into these entities, including the main entity controlling the others, hiding around to get the jump on you. The game is small and quick to pick up and do runs of, with it never feeling like you could lose too much progress, also making for fresh tension each time. Not long after, we'd get the Building of Insanity, though despite this being the cover and cassette label, the title and game over screens refer to the game as Horror House Part 2. People are consecutively going missing in said building, and finding a body is probably not a good sign. This game has a bit more to sink your teeth in while still keeping brief for the replay, and with a more dramatic use of colors highlighting things in the otherwise colorless environment. It reminds me of SimCity's art direction where everything is colorless except for red and yellow. A rumored third game that would have sped up the image processing and go for a larger scale titled Antworld allegedly fell by the wayside as they focused on Demon's Ring, but interestingly is described as being about rescuing your girlfriend who got pulled into an anthill at the park. Sounds like quite the evolution of setting, yet not too crazy for the genre that's not exactly always known for being as grounded as Mystery House. Fret not, however, as despite not popping in more games to find out it's secretly a Horror House sequel, Neon Falcom offered more games that you can easily have done this to, the obvious being Monster House, which didn't have the striking art direction of Horror House, but was basically a Sharp MZ equivalent where someone never returned from a house, and you're going in to find out what happened to them. While following the formula of Horror House, Monster House is quicker and easier to do things in thanks to actions being mapped to single keys instead of having to type things out, making encounters with monsters essentially feel like QuickTime events. Despite Next's dominance in the market, there was a large variety of popular pre-builds to target when making games. Furukawa was another company that goes back to the 1800s, with even their grandchild Fujitsu being seen as one of the oldest IT companies in the world. They would release a junior version of their 1981 Fujitsu Micro 8 as the Fujitsu Micro 7, which was a stripped-down, more affordable version of it at almost half the price. This allowed it to become popular and supported by a plethora of games, from simplistic art styles like Elevator Game where you play as a group of 5 people trying to stop a woman from jumping, to Relics' more third console generation detailed tiled look, including its large characters taking up multiple tiles. In this game you play in far from the fluidity you'd expect from a console, which was apparently a particular hurdle especially faced in porting to other desktops, though it would get a sequel for the family computer that fixes that. In the 1986 original you play as a spooky spirit exploring the mysterious place you found yourself in, and have the ability to spirit ride, or possess the bodies of those you perished to use their abilities and fool their colleagues into thinking you're one of them. Something I wish more games where you can equip enemy uniforms would take into consideration. While I doubt anyone considers it a horror game, I thought fans of Disney's Discovery Island might get a kick out of the 1983 game Dezeni Land, where you go places you probably shouldn't while exploring a close parody of the theme park in your goal of robbing souvenirs. Make sure you don't find yourself face to face with a lion while spelunking. It could also serve as somewhat of a time capsule of the park. And games with these full-colored images would be a bar quickly raising through the 1980s. There was also, of course, real-time goodness on desktops, like 1985's Violent Dragon Godzilla Big City Destruction, sometimes translated as Fierce Dragon Godzilla Metropolis Destruction, for the Sharp X1. Unlike the MZ series by their computer division, the X series by their television division seemed to wipe out that computer division, with its reputation almost being solely its red options pretty cases. Do not underestimate style. Alongside Fujitsu and NEC, this trio would come to be known as the 8-bit esteem three houses. And Godzilla for the Sharp X1 might have what you consider to be an over-enthusiastic use of colors in its top-down segments. But I have to admit it has some great-looking head-on segments of you taking on humanity. This being a game that just lets you play as a giant monster destroying a city is what many wanted from a Godzilla game. And I love the reporter's panic serving as feedback for your actions. But of course, by even looking at the game in motion, you might question its gameplay fluidity. Unlike 177, an erotic comedy where like 1983's Texas Chainsaw, you play the pursuer set in the fear of being chased on your way home at night, leading to poking fun at the trope of running away in a horror movie like Friday the 13th, in which people often joke about how unbeatable a challenge it seems to outrun a Jason figure, though if you were hurling grenades in the woods at night, I could see it tripping more people up. This is played up to a humorous extent of fans pushing you two back, and both of you trying not to trip on various animals like cats and tortoises. I love how the game sells an even playing field, where both of you can get messed up on all the goofy things and maybe even try to trip each other up on them. You can imagine the antics that ensue in the finale of adult media, with the game never taking itself seriously with the ending you get depending on how well you're satisfied after the chase. Now if you're looking for less tongue-in-cheek horror, in 1987 DB Soft would drop on us Produce. An interesting horror strategy played more seriously where you're consumed by jealousy the two people in your friend circle are dating. You make a deal with a demon to lure them to their end in an abandoned building, with an understanding that you'll be rewarded with the one you secretly love. As you strategize manipulating your own friends into the final action of their lives, you have a lot to think about. To go further in the direction of shock horror, 1987 would also see Youkiden, which can really raise the bar of your worry of how dark things can possibly go. In its story of a group of friends who stumbled onto an old temple while having fun in the woods, and in taking something as a souvenir ended up cursed. This game is most noted for a scene where someone has their hands and feet ripped off, and then has her face still moving, presumably experiencing the pain of this. The thing behind her catches up to her in 177. In introducing players to how bad things can possibly get in an unknown video game, it then transfers over that worry to future games you play. Now it's in your head that things could get this bad. Exploring the world of Dwelling is worrying. It feels like a world designed for a children's fantasy book. Vibrant, full of dung humor, and with logic unlike what's normal to you. Yet you feel like the gloves are off when it comes to what can be done to you. You may run into a pig dressed as a butcher preparing a human, but he's not going to attack you on sight. You're both intelligent enough to talk, as you eyeball his work. It'd be less scary if what you encountered in Dwelling were attack on sight enemies. Instead, you feel like you're face to face with dangerous creatures you don't want to set off. Now, if you want to get into games that replicated what horror movies do, 1987's Makai Resurrection is probably the most one-to-one. The pacing and direction of cinematography sync with a score I could only compare to 20th century horror films. Is the most accurate depiction of a horror movie I've ever felt a video game accomplish. That constant direction of how a film's score syncs with its visuals, or when it chooses to let the environmental ambience be what takes over the scene's audio. The way the pacing slowly eases the viewer, in this case the player, into the anticipation of what's going to go down is identical to that of a 20th century horror movie to me. The game being in first person also makes you feel like a character in the movie instead of the director or viewer. You're often bouncing off your supporting cast members in a plot that felt like an 80s horror movie I never heard of. While this is the most one-to-one simulation of a horror movie, Legend of the Melvel takes into account that it's not a movie or a comic book in its direction. You still have cool effects like the flicker of neon lights and separate shots taking into account how they complement each other when in view simultaneously. But the game never restricts itself to replicate a format that it's not. It'll go from a scene playing out in a widescreen video to multiple windows being overlaid simultaneously. As you investigate the mysterious sudden extinction of an entire church, it creates a dread that hangs over the fact that most of the game is just you being a living journalist, trying to get to the bottom of what's happening. I do think the music is a bit overbearing at times, and the downtime was not well executed to me. Apart from going for the much more traditional direction of its visuals, I find Darkness's Iyo Legend improved all the strengths of Legend of Melvel and even looks better. But its strength for me was an improvement over Legend of Melvel's slow pacing and use of tonal contrast. The calming upbeat music in your vibrant yet not overbearing office, with the strong sun shining through the window in a way that evokes a nostalgia in me for taking a moment to relax inside during vibrant summer days. This not only lets you catch your breath, but gives you a baseline to then contrast the game's darker moments with. And Iyo Legend has a lot more downtime, it's just executed in a way that holds my interest much better. Whereas Legend of Melvel, despite also having downtime, might have you feeling like there was no time to rest because you've lacked progress in a time-crucial case versus the slower pacing in Iyo Legend. I find a lot of horror games decide not to include many purely pleasant scenes and imagine they view it as unimportant filler that makes it take longer to get to what people came for. But I wonder if it's overlooked how much it helps the effectiveness of horror moments to provide non-horror that they contrast with. It shocked me to go back to Mikami and Kojima talking about their upcoming games Silent Hill and Evil Within, because Mikami said if there's too much information, even if the atmosphere is scary, you don't know where to focus. It's interesting hearing him say that because I find Evil Within to be the greatest offender of this, despite having multiple rooms with just a thought-provoking chair. Everywhere you look could be a horror screensaver with no breaks, making it all blend together. You stop thinking about what you're seeing because nothing looks off. That requires contrast. Iyo Legend allows you to develop that sense of normalcy for it to shatter, thus fostering a fear that your warmth can be taken away by the horror you're dealing with. This is also helped greatly by the world feeling populated with many interactable people and places as dense as cities, that your life can become intertwined with in ways that you won't be sure will end up positive, negative, or more nuanced than either. I also appreciate this game's ability to feel like a fully sized functioning country while keeping you in the minority of it that you can interact with. with. Looking back on the 1980s, you might find it easier to notice that increasing volume of games being made for more niche crowds. Perhaps the natural outcome of an increasing amount of people making games, including how many grew up with them, envisioning what could be done next, what could be expressed next, and with increasingly accessible technology to do so. As things get less broad, they become more personal. And all this art targeting different niches results in you being able to find horror much more up your alley. I'm Oktaro.